when I took the job as a state House representative for the 31st District, I wanted to make sure that when I came across issues like this, I did the right thing, and I think it was the most consequential vote we had. I will say, with respect to prevailing wage is intended to make sure that people are paid a living wage. And here in the Southeast in particular, it doesn't drive off costs that much. It really doesn't. But what it does do, it enables working families to be able to make ends meet. And that's why we need to support prevailing wage.
May I?
Marguerite, do you have another comment on roads?
Yeah, you know, some of what we need to do with regard to our roads is just common sense. A couple of years ago, we had a new general maintenance manager come in here for Bucks County. I met with him within a month he's on his job. He said, I don't even want to tell you this, but there's been a system of non-systems here. You get a call, he runs over here, whoever's yelling the loudest or has the most clout is getting that road project done. We have stopped that. We've put on a maintenance plan, and a few months later, he came back, and I had a meeting with all of my township managers to explain it.
And Steve, you have a chance to comment.
Sure. I think one of the things we still have to do, we've had a succession of governors now who said that they really want to change the culture at PennDOT. I still think that hasn't quite happened. And we need to get to a place with PennDOT where projects are happening in a more timely way, and that they are really, doing the projects that need to be done first and going about it in that way. We also have a public-private partnership program here in Pennsylvania. I was on that board, and it's done a lot, especially on replacing smaller bridges that have helped get those projects done quickly.
Obviously a thorny problem. And here's another one. Steve, this is going to you. Gun violence prevention. If elected, will you sign on to gun violence prevention measures, such as closing loopholes in our background check system that allow the private sale of long guns, including the AR-15 used at Tree of Life, without a background check, and also work to reinstate a ban on semi-automatic rifles and high-capacity magazines, the weapon of choice for mass shooters?
The answer is yes to both, an emphatic yes to both. When I was in the House, I was the author of House Bill 1010, which was the background check bill. And the only thing we have to do in Pennsylvania, we have a pretty good background check system right now. We have one loophole, which is the sale of private sale of long guns. Every other purchase of weapons, armed guns and rifles in Pennsylvania has to have a background check. So we need to close that loophole, and it needs to happen now. I'm also a supporter of an assault weapons ban. There's no reason that anyone needs to have these weapons of mass destruction. They are intended to kill as many people in as short a time as possible. And with that, we need to limit the number of rounds in a magazine, and we need to outlaw bump stocks, which take a semi-automatic weapon and turn it into an automatic weapon, as we saw in the Las Vegas shooting last year, making it far more lethal than that. No more excuses on this issue. No more excuses. You know, Francine Wheeler, one of the moms at Newtown, Connecticut, came and testified in front of the House back in 2013. There wasn't a dry eye in the place, but they would not bring up the background check bill, which is the simplest, most reasonable thing we could possibly do. Enough.
Marguerite, your question on gun violence and background checks?
This is a question where I can honestly say I'm the only one in this room who's actually passed legislation to address gun violence. I've recently been honored to have Governor Wolf sign into law House Bill 2060, which we're about another 40 days out until it actually becomes law, will take the guns out of the hands of convicted domestic abusers, and will get them in, instead of in 60 days, get them in 24 hours. I was pleased to work in a bipartisan way on this common sense gun legislation, and my voting record for the last 12 years when given the opportunity to vote on common sense legislation, reflects that I'm there. I voted years ago for the lost and stolen legislation that says if your firearm's lost or stolen, when you become aware of it, you've got to report that. I voted when you had your House Bill 1010 with the background checks. I voted when you got that as an amendment. I am a co-sponsor of the bump stock bill. I don't see why any normal person, anyone in my neighborhood or the community in which I serve, needs to have an AR-15. But I am very pleased to be able to stand in front of my constituents and say, I delivered results and not just rhetoric on this.
Steve, another comment from you?
Well, advocating for reasonable gun violence prevention measures is not rhetoric. It's fighting for the members of our community. And the fact of the matter is, for each of the last 5 elections, you were endorsed by the NRA, and you had an A- rating from them. I mean, those are the facts. And until this year, you hadn't put your name on a gun violence prevention measure. Now, listen, it's one thing at election time to say that you're for, certain measures. But being out there day in, day out, and fighting for these things is quite a different matter. And that's where I've been throughout my career, and that's why I will be as a member of the state Senate.
Steve, I have a C from the NRA, so why don't you get your facts right? Anyone with a phone right now, Google it. I've had an A-, I've had a B+, you've had a B-, okay? Their ratings are most likely dependent on what has come up those years. Many of those years, nothing's come up. So maybe that's when they're giving me an A-. I represent the constituents I serve. I grew up in a Second Amendment house. I'm not backing away from that. My parents moved to Bucks County because Dad liked to hunt. I respect the Second Amendment, but with the Second Amendment come responsibilities.
I'm sorry, we'll have to end. Thank you. And moving on to seniors' taxes. And that's going to be to you, Marguerite. What are your thoughts on lowering property taxes for seniors?
I would love to do it. I'm married to a senior. It might even help in my own house. However, we have a constitutional uniformity clause that says we can't just direct property tax relief to one group of citizens as opposed to another. And years ago, before I came in the House or before Steve did, we introduced gaming. Hopefully gaming was going to give meaningful property tax relief throughout Pennsylvania. It didn't. It's not even meaningful Comcast relief right now. There have been many bills that have been out there that say, we could try and eliminate property taxes. We can't eliminate property taxes without coming up with a $13 to $14 billion solution to supplant the $13 to $14 billion that comes from the local property tax effort. My Palisades School District here in the 143rd actually offers property tax relief, a $500 cap in exchange for volunteering at the schools. That's a great program if different school districts can do it. Central Bucks is actually probably too big at 21,000 students to do it, but Palisades at 1,900 can. I want to be able to take those property taxes down. We try and address it on the local level with the school districts, with Act 1, to try and say you can't raise the school taxes above a certain index.
Okay. Thank you. And Steve, you get to address the property taxes for seniors?
Yeah, property taxes for seniors, particularly seniors on fixed incomes, and frankly, for anyone, and particularly folks on fixed incomes, it's a problem. There have been, in recent years in the House and in the Senate, proposals to eliminate property taxes. I have not supported those because they have involved massive increases in both the sales and the income tax, and also because at the end of the day, switching to just an income tax base for funding our schools is a dangerous thing. States that have done that have seen large declines in funding for schools when the economy turns down, and that's not a good thing. I think at the end of the day, one of the best things we can do is make sure that our state is putting more money toward basic education, because the biggest part of your property tax bill is what comes out for your school district. The county and the municipality share is relatively small. So if the state does a better job of funding schools, we can stabilize property taxes, and that's got to be the first step. How do we do that? Well, again, we need to pass a natural gas severance tax. That's one of the things we need to do. And that has to happen sooner rather than later because, again, we have these needs and they're going unaddressed.
Thank you. And Marguerite, do you have another?
You know, Steve, you have in fact voted for massive sales and tax increases in sales and use and income. It wasn't going towards senior property taxes, and nor was it just going to education. It was $8 billion of taxes that were coming in. I think what we need to do, and every one of you, when you vote for the commissioners next year, you ask the county commissioners what they're going to do about a reassessment here. And until we get that reassessment here at the county level, which we've been overdue since 1972, we have not had one, we need to adapt on a state level a rolling reassessment program.
Okay, thank you. Steve, did you have another comment?
Well, again, we need to provide more income to our schools. That's what we need to do at the end of the day. And the severance tax is, I think, a critical component of that. But we have to make sure that, you know, we are making a level playing field. And, you know, these companies that have been drilling in the Marcellus Shale have been getting a pretty big windfall for a long time now, and it's really cost average taxpayers here in Pennsylvania.
Okay. This should be an easy one.
There are no easy questions.
There are no easy questions, or no easy answers.
That's also true.
The questions are easy for me. And this is for you, Steve. What piece of legislation you authored are you most proud of?
Well, a few things. I had a bill back in 2009 that ultimately got adopted as part of the fiscal code that made it easy for state charter banks to have credit to lend out to small businesses. If you remember back at that time in the Great Recession, there was a credit crunch, and it was one of the problems why the economy was not expanding. So I think that's something that was really important. But I have to tell you, one of the things that I'm most proud of as a legislative success actually occurred in another state capital, in Trenton. Back in 2010, the New Jersey state government decided it was going to pass a law requiring all public employees who work in the Garden State to live in New Jersey. Now, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that, given where Bucks County is geographically, we have thousands of families that would have been impacted by this. And think about that back in 2010, when the housing market was in the dumpster and the job market was doing badly. These people were going to have to choose between their jobs and their homes. And I lobbied and ultimately got an amendment in that bill to grandfather in the current employees. And as a consequence, again, thousands of people were able to keep their jobs, and I'm very proud of that.
Okay, and Marguerite, how about your legislation?
Thank you. I've been privileged over the 12 years to pass a number of pieces of legislation into law, so you're really asking me to choose my favorite child. But I'm going to pick the one that just passed, and I really look forward to post-election. The governor has assured me that I'm going to have a bill signing with him on House Bill 2060. This was historic, as deemed by the Inquirer the other day in their editorial about it. It was historic to finally, in Pennsylvania's very conservative body, get gun legislation passed. This is not just a Republican issue. There were a number of Democrats, including Democrat leadership, who voted against this bill. The words were, "This is the camel's head under the tent." There was so much put out there that was just garbage about this bill, from the left and from the right. Even those people who were supportive of this bill had the nerve to then say it didn't go far enough. This is what's been the problem with politics, is that everyone wants ownership on something, and no one's just ready to say, I'm willing to do something to compromise and to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We've got historic gun legislation signed by the governor, authored by a Republican in the Senate, signed by a Democrat governor, and I look forward to that celebration with him. And I've already asked some of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join, because this took work all around. This was not just a single effort by just me.
Thank you. We don't have any, I think our time together is drawing to the end, so we're going to go to our final 2-minute closing statements. And Steve, as we agreed, you will be the first.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Marguerite, for participating with us tonight. Thank all of you for coming out, the League for hosting. We live in interesting times. That's probably an understatement. As the events of the last week have shown, words matter and leadership matters. We have an opportunity on Tuesday, November 6th, to make progress on a host of issues, whether it's gun violence prevention, whether it's environmental protection, whether it's investing in the future of our kids through education, whether it's making sure that every Pennsylvanian enjoys equal rights and that a woman has the ability to determine her own health care fate. These issues are on the ballot on November 6th, make no mistake. This is not about electing me. This is about whether or not we are going to have meaningful change. We think about all the things that are happening in Washington, but we very seldom recognize that what happens at the state government level is so very important as well. And for many of the issues we talked about tonight, it's clear that we need change in Harrisburg. We need new leadership in Harrisburg. We need people who are going to fight for these things. It's not happening under the current leadership. It needs to be changed. You know, when I started this campaign 10 months ago, I talked about the image of the sun rising in the morning and how that image conveyed hope in the new day. We need a new day in Pennsylvania. I ask that you join me in taking that first step on Tuesday to make it a reality. Thank you, and I ask for your support.
And Marguerite, your closing statement?
Thank you, Suzanne, the League, Delval, Steve, and yes, all of you for being here to participate in this. I started off and told you that 12 years ago, I promised my constituents what I would do for them. And I promised integrity, honesty, accessibility, and hard work. What I didn't know back then is as much as I would try, I didn't know what I would accomplish. I've accomplished a heck of a lot. I've accomplished a number of things that have gotten into legislation. Bills authored under my name, bills authored by me that have been put into other bills, namely our fiscal code, things that improve the quality of life here for all of our constituents. I did not realize that by my going all through this district, I would have the privilege and honor of people trusting me with their issues, with stories, with things that were close to them where they needed help. And I've been in a position to be able to help them through legislative, through connecting people. You talk about we need a change in leadership. The Senate's not going to go, the Republican Senate will not be in the minority at the end of this election cycle. It just can't happen numerically. What Bucks County needs is a senator that will be in the majority. A senator like me who leans in, who understands what the people need because she's living it. She travels, I travel, I get involved with everything that happens in this community. I show up, I'm just not talk. I deliver. I've done that for 12 years, I'll consider to do that. I listen and I act. This is not just about the social issues you're trying to make it about, Steve. It's about integrity. It's about having someone like me who's a public servant who needs politics to do her job sometime, not a politician who dabbles in public service and looks to see what position they're going to run for next.
Thank you.
Yes, it's a big decision on November 6th. I humbly ask for your support. Thank you.
That concludes our can of work. You're welcome. On behalf of the League, I would like to thank Delaware Valley University for the use of their facilities, also to the League volunteers and our coordinator, Judy Fanlin. Don't forget, obviously, voting on Tuesday. Thank you.